Guyana sits at the northern edge of the South American continent. Its low-lying coast, where most of its people live and work, faces the mighty Atlantic Ocean. Much of that coastline is protected by a brick wall known as the seawall. That structure was built about 2 centuries ago to keep the ocean from flooding the sugar plantations and trade posts along the coast and to prevent tons of mud from washing onto the coast. For years, the seawall and other sea defenses protected the coast from the seemingly relentless Atlantic Ocean. However, rising sea levels and increased wave action driven by the climate crisis challenge those defenses.
I stood, a couple of feet below the wall looking up right by Sheriff Street as water flowed over like a waterfall. And said, the thought I had, the only thing I left to see was God. If this is happening now as the climate crisis deepens, I would no longer be able to live in the house that I grew up in.
Damien Finance moved to Georgetown just near the seawall at Sheriff Street in 1984. As he grew up, Damien saw changes behind and beyond the seawall near him. There was the expansion of the highway and the construction of new buildings on land, as well as the ocean pushing against the seawall, getting closer and closer, even crashing over the concrete structure.
Oh, right.
I'm standing in the exact area where there was significant overtopping in 2013. Then, the water from the Atlantic Ocean came over the seawall and onto the highway. Now back then, you could have climbed up on this seawall and gone down onto the shore. You could have dipped your toes into the Atlantic Ocean. But now there are certain parts of the coast, like here, where you can't necessarily do that because there's lots of mud and mangroves emerging yet again. This mud and the mangroves here now were here before, centuries ago, but they were cleared away for agriculture. And all the while, the coast remained extremely vulnerable.
This concrete wall and a lot of different versions of it across the coast forever changed the way the ocean behaves, and the living part of our coast has been disturbed. So for instance, take this wall outside of Sheriff Street. It's concrete and it reflects the energy and sends it back when the waves would hit. The wall worked for a while when we were growing sugar for other people, right? But that basically over the years that has changed, and now what's happening, it seems, is that there's so much mud in this particular mud bank that is overwhelming the wall.
The seawall has been developed as part of a larger system of drainage, irrigation, and coastal defense. Since the 1800s, this seawall has been under establishment, and it was developed when Guyana, then a colony, was a key spot for sugar cultivation, the transatlantic trade, and the labor of enslaved Africans. James Rodway, who's regarded as one of the most authoritative historians on the colonial history of Guyana, wrote, quote, "The tangled line of mangrove swamp, which formed the shores of Guyana, had been left in its native wilderness. Consisting as it did of oozy black mud, covered by the sea at high tides, it would have been the most repulsive to any but a Dutchman. Yet, as we well know, it is one of the richest soils on the face of the globe when properly drained," unquote. And in his 1891 book, The History of British Guyana, Rodway said, quote, "A narrow strip of land along the coast has been rescued from the mangrove swamp and kept under cultivation by a system of dams and dikes," unquote. The coast was made more suitable for agriculture then and now. And over the years, the narrow strip of land out here became increasingly sophisticated, in terms of coastal defense at least, with structures like the seawall, which was completed here in 1860, and riprap, which is the loose stone you see closer to the shore that helps to break the water coming in.
It allowed colonial era type agriculture to come as close to the ocean as possible. So it was good for productivity. In the long term, however, what it has done is it's allowed the land on this side to sink. The mud kind of centuries of cultivation, drainage, and irrigation, the land is kind of sinking as it does normally. Without a resupply of mud or sediment, that will continue to sink. So the wall has stopped the resupply of mud that built the land on the southern side. So what is happening in front of Georgetown and Ogle and those areas is a restarting of this process. So imagine this is how the land and the coast was created. Mud would pass from the Amazon. When it would build up, mangroves would grow onto it, and the shoreline would move forward.
Right now, tons of mud line certain parts of Guyana's coast. When you're out there, you can't miss it. Now, this mud has been traveling from the mouth of the Amazon River across the coast of the Guyana'S at the northern edge of the South American continent to the Orinoco River. Now, the mud comes from sediment collected and deposited and then expelled. That sediment then moves along the coast from the Amazon River due to a combination of factors, including waves, tides, and winds. That stretch between the Amazon River and the Orinoco River is about 1,500 kilometers long, and it's known as the world's muddiest coast, and Guyana is found right there. This journey and the complex processes associated with the mud have been detailed in a 2010 study published in the Earth Sciences Review journal. Now, centuries ago, when the sea defense structures were built across Guyana's coast, these processes weren't understood, and the mud, though embraced for agriculture, was not seen as an integral part of coastal defense. In his book, A History of the Guyanese Working People, 1881 to 1905, Guyanese historian Walter Rodney wrote that the colony's legislature, in 1882, felt that both the erosion and accretion at the foreshore were unpredictable, thereby causing great uncertainty as to the causes which led to banks forming at certain points and washing away at others. That uncertainty remained, but all decision makers, whether from the planter class before independence or the country's new leaders post-independence, knew that coastal protection was important to protect economic activity and the development of livelihoods. The seawall was built and riprap added years later. Now the mud and mangroves line many parts of the coast again. Damien believes that the mud out here is even more valuable now than it was to the plantation owners.
What's happening right now in front of Georgetown is a mud bank is arriving. What we actually see is the parts of the mud bank that's being shed, and that's what washes up against the shore, creates mud flats. But the mud bank is actually submerged and it's off the coast. The story of that particular mud bank begins about 1,000 years ago. And what happens is that when the Amazon empties all the sediment, it kind of washes from all of South America into the ocean. The currents there then kind of reorganize the mud into these mud banks, and they start to slowly migrate from the Amazon towards the Guyana'S. So this mud bank that we see now has been moving towards us about 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers a year for the last 1,000 years. Now it's here just in time.
Why do you say just in time?
I would say just in time primarily because of the climate crisis, and just when other countries across the world are sinking or dealing with storm surges or higher sea levels, the mud bank comes and starts to create new land between us and the ocean, and also the submerged mud bank is breaking the energy of the waves.
Perhaps harnessing the mud could be how Guyana fortifies or strengthens its vulnerable coast, but that might not necessarily be an easy undertaking. It is believed that the mud can foster the natural regrowth of mangrove forests along the coast, though hard structures like seawalls too close to the waterline may create an unfavorable environment for growth. So certain green-gray interventions which merge the natural forest and man-made structures can be pursued to boost sea defense while facilitating accretion and eventually mangrove restoration. These efforts are particularly important for the community of Danzig, Shaconeil, where breaches of the coastal defense in 2019 and 2020 led to serious wars. Some farmers still recall the tragedies that unfolded in those years.
My place is the first place where the water come in, and well, actually then the water start to spread, and everybody some people have rice to reap at the same time, which on my property, and the water just come and flood everything. All who have livestock, fruits, tree, everything was just flooded and damaged. Most of the cattle, the livestock was dead, and which was left, and just after you just send it off.
When the water broke away from the sea, it was in the road, and the water come through the canal and the company trench. And when the company trench raises, that runs from house to house, right through. So everybody started flooding the house, everybody had to last a lot of things in the room, the house, kitchen, down, see it flood, and then everyone helped a lot of people and things. God, the other pictures, the water comes so quick, and nobody could do nothing.
Around the mouth of the Maikoni River, where Danzig is one of the areas the Deltares report has recommendations for. And it is an area where Guyana's National Agricultural Research and Extension Institute, NARI for short, is rolling out an intervention for coastal defense and mangrove restoration efforts. Keen Mosley has been the backbone behind NARI's mangrove restoration efforts.
This area experienced an erosion cycle, so that removed the mangroves that were here, providing the primary protection. And as a result of that, because they had no hard sea defenses here at the time, you had the earthen dam. The dam was breached, and basically the ocean and the land was pretty much one at that time. So as a result of that, the hard sea defenses that you see here is quite recent, and they're still doing work, as you can see with the trucks, in terms of coming in to do emergency works to protect the farmlands and the community, because the water was all the way out to the main road. And the farmers themselves understood the importance of the mangrove. So we actually got a call, in terms of ministerial outreach, of asking what it is the government is going to do. So as part of that, Danzig became important for us with regards to restoration. Restoration is going to take some time, because what we're doing with the structures right now is creating the optimal environment for mangroves to return. And as part of that is capturing the sediments, raising the elevation, and creating the environment.
Okay, so what's the structure that you've put in place here?
So this is a timber breakwater. This is the first time that we're trialing it. We've done other structures around that same objective of capturing sediments and creating the environment for mangroves. So, but the timber breakwater is the first time we're trialing and piloting that at the Danzig area. One, because of the erosion that happened, the wave energy. So we thought we needed a more robust structure, and working with CI and Deltares, this is one of the design options that we opted to go with. We have the timber piles, and they're spaced in such a way that one, they break the energy of the waves from hitting the shore, and at the same time, as the waves coming and bring in the sediments, the trap sediments on this side, creating the optimal elevation that would support mangroves. And you can see the difference in terms of where the structure is and on the other side, in terms of the fact that the tide is going to be at its lowest in about another half an hour, but we've already seen the impact of the structure since we completed it last year. So you're already seeing increase in terms of the sedimentation and an increase in elevation.
Okay, so the mud that's coming along the coast, how does that fit into what you're doing here at Danzig?
Right, so the mud is a gift for us, right? When we're talking about mangroves. And as I explained what happened in 2019, as Danzig was experiencing erosion, you have a change in the cycle right now. So we're seeing sedimentation. So what the structure helps to do, and as part of our methodology, is that we try to place the structure so that we can take advantage of that mud that is offshore. So they're sort of looking at speeding up the process, capturing the sediments, because what we find is that some of the locations, while you have a mud bank offshore and sediments coming in, it doesn't always stay. So you see some areas where we call like a slush mud happening. So the mud is there, but then it moves and it goes back out with the waves. So the structures are there to be able to trap the sediments, and as this one is designed as a breakwater, so it's also reducing the wave energy.
Mm-hmm. At a very basic level, help us to understand not just why you're doing this, but why you're trying to, I guess, stimulate the growth of mangroves.
So for us, mangroves are important not just for coastal protection. So we're looking at two approaches. So for Guyana, we need our hard structure. So it's not that we're looking to suggest that we can do without the hard sea defenses. We need the hard sea defenses to be able to occupy the coast. But what mangroves does is increase our resilience. So where we can establish mangroves in front of our hard sea defenses, you have reduced wave energy, not just hitting the sea defenses, but in terms of what would reach the farms or agriculture and our homes as well. So that's increasing our our protection. You will notice that a few years ago, you couldn't, at a spring tide, drive in certain areas in Georgetown without the water overtopping the seawall. Now you don't even recognize that when there's a springtime, because you're not having that impact. You have the growth of the mangroves, the increase in terms of the elevation offshore, and that is providing the protection. So that is, the protection is one. That is very important. 90% of our population is on the coast, so we need that coastal protection to be able to occupy this space. But then you have other added benefits. You have the biodiversity that mangrove supports. When you have the mangroves, you have the return of birds. For communities that depend on fisheries, there's a direct link to fisheries and mangroves. Mangroves providing a nursery for juvenile fish. And then you have communities that depend on crab catching as a livelihood. So as you have the ecosystem established and you have a healthy mangrove ecosystem, you have all these added benefits, including the coastal protection that you wouldn't have with hard sea defenses. So it's a combination that we're promoting, what we call this green-gray infrastructure approach, the gray in terms of your hard sea defenses and your mangroves as well.
NARI's mangrove work isn't limited to Danzig. In fact, there are various interventions in several other areas across the coast, from those that involve bamboo fences to concrete groins in use. The use of the infrastructure varies based on the area's need, the wave energy there, and the amount of mud around. The focus, however, is still on fortifying coastal defenses and restoring mangrove forests. And it seems as though these interventions are working, as huge mangrove forests line areas once bare, and there hasn't been overtopping or any breaches in those spaces. Now back in the capital, Damien remains optimistic about what this mud can do for Guyana's coast and the people who live and work here.
For the first time in a generation, we're having enough of a buffer and a big enough of a mud bank to build and to allow the coast to push back the ocean to so much of a degree that it will likely, if we work now, survive these erosion cycles. This phenomenon in front of Georgetown, because it's so big, we estimating to be happening to us for the next 20 years and thereabouts. It's hard to say exactly, but 20 years is a good average, but it could be anywhere between 10 to 30 years of mud and new land being built for the residents of Jarstone. This mud, it kind of gives you a completely different appreciation as to what you're looking at and also what it's doing for us. Now, when the climate crisis is sinking its teeth into a lot of our small states, it is the same muddy water and the same mud that offers us a chance, and a better chance that most countries across this planet have. And it's one really that I feel if we begin to understand what it is that we're looking at, and I'm only beginning to understand it myself, we begin to see the wonders of nature and how it could really help us not just to survive but to thrive as mangroves.
The mud and mangroves are changing Guyana's coast again. It is hoped that in a few years' time, the coast will be better protected against the ferocious Atlantic Ocean and the climate crisis. Reporting for the newsroom, Vishani Ragobeer.